Welcome to the Show Up Show, where we bring you everything you need to emerge as a powerful and healthy leader in your life, business, and relationships. Because how you show up in one area of life is how you show up in all of them. I'm your host, Debbie Pace, author of The Journal to Freedom, a foundational guide to help you examine your beliefs and how they shape your patterns and behaviors in life, so you can transform what's not working and can show up like a boss in every area of your life. This week on the Show Up Show, it's my honor to chat with saxophonist, composer, and educator Butch Thomas, who's so humble he may not even mention that he's been on tour with Sting, Lenny Kravitz, and many other artists. As he shares his story with us, we see the major impact it has when we surround ourselves with the right people and show up as who we really are. Tune in now to hear all about it. I met you at a unique event where a monk was he brought together all these people at a church, and we were doing these amazing musical performances, and it was a participatory event. And I met you because you were playing the saxophone there. So tell me a little bit about some of your experiences, how you got into it, and what led you to that point.
As a matter of fact, I'm writing a book on this too. I call it an autoethnography, which is basically an autobiography, but it also has the audience of the academic crowd. Now, I got into this. My parents were into music. My father was a professional saxophone player. I knew what I wanted to do since I was 4 years old. There would be these shows that come on Friday nights and Saturday nights. One was called Shindig, and another one was called the Hollywood Palace. And I would go because the Byrds were famous, the Rolling Stones were famous, the Beatles, of course, we're talking 1964. Mostly a lot of rock groups. So before the show would start, I'd run to the bathroom and get long rolled pieces of toilet paper. And I'd get a baseball cap so I'd have long hair. And then I'd go get the tennis racket, and that would be my guitar. And I would sit in front of the TV and watch these groups, and I'd call myself strumming or jamming with them because I wanted to be there so bad.
Now, was your dad, he was a professional saxophonist as well?
Yes. My father was a studio musician for Capitol Records on the weekends. And so John Coltrane would be flowing through the house, and the Beatles would flow through the house. My mom liked the Beatles. My dad liked John Coltrane. So I got the best of both worlds. We moved around quite a bit because my dad changed jobs, and then ultimately my mother and father got a divorce. So we moved to San Francisco, and Sly Stone used to be our local DJ. And so he would play this music, and I just remember hearing his voice. And the next thing I knew, he had a band and they were making records. And so I was like, man, I want to do this. I'm just so influenced. So I told my grandmother I wanted an electric guitar.
How old were you at the time?
7.
Wow.
I didn't know it needed an amplifier. All I knew is I had a guitar.
Instant rock star, right?
On my block, I was the man. You couldn't hear me, but I had a guitar. But I didn't like to practice. I took lessons, and I hated practicing because it was something that I didn't want to do. I wanted to go play with my friends. When you're 7, you want to go play. And if somebody does not instill this in you as far as discipline, you're not going to know till later. So my guitar career was ever so short. And I went to school. I still love music. I listened to music more than anything else. So when I got to be in the 8th grade, there was a slot in the school band for a flute. I didn't know how to play the flute, but the guy gave me a flute, gave me a method book. I went home and I started studying. And I said, well, I know I don't like to practice, but this is the only way I'm going to get better. Throughout time, I practiced and kept listening to music. And at that time, I was getting more geared towards, I always liked rock. But I was getting more geared towards like Herbie Hancock, and the jazz fusion scene was just coming out. And I was working at a radio station. I used to work at a radio station when I was 15. Back in those days, they had record stores. So my job, I had a top 10 list. I had to call all the record stores in St. Louis to see how these top 10 records were selling. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was getting paid. I knew that. But I didn't know the importance of what I was doing. So people would come to town, acts, and I would always go to all the shows for free, because I would be with the DJs.
Oh, yeah. Radio stations and the free tickets. You got to love that, right?
When you're 15 and this is your first experience, It's like, oh my God, this is what I really want to do now. All the lights and the big stage and the loud music, and they're getting paid for doing it. I was like, yeah. I was going to be a record executive. That's what they were grooming me for. My boss was the program director for AM R&B station. And I would go to these record luncheons with the Columbia Records and all the big record companies and have these nice lavish lunches, and listen to them talk about things. And what they were actually doing, they were paying the DJs. They had this thing called payola, which still exists, but it's against the law. They would hand over a bag full of new LPs and say, can you play this on rotation? And I didn't know what rotation meant, but that means when you're frequently playing this guy's song every 30 minutes or something like that. So I was like really liking this. And so what they would do, since this was an R&B station, they would give me all the jazz promo records. So I had the new Mahavishnu Orchestra and new Jaco Pastorius record and the new this and the new that. And so this one record, it had an interesting cover on it. It was the Jaco Pastorius record. I said, this guy looks interesting. And he was playing these things called harmonics. And it didn't sound like a bass to me. It sounded like he had bells on his bass. And then Weather Report was this other band. So Jaco played with Weather Report. Mind you, I'm 15 at the time. But I didn't understand this record, so I gave it to a friend of mine who played bass. And he took the record and held it up and ran down the street with the album cover in his hand. Like, this is the new savior kind of thing. So a year went by and Weather Report came to St. Louis. There were only really 3 nice hotels that you could stay in St. Louis around 1975. 1976. So I called each one of the hotels and I found where Jaco was. Jaco called me back and invited me to the show. You know, he gave me 3 tickets because you always had to have a friend who had a car, who drove.
That's right.
And then you had your best friend and then me. So we go to Weather Report. We walk in there free. We had our stage passes on. We're in high school still. And so Jaco introduced himself. He took us backstage and gave me his phone number and his address. And I was too scared to call him because he was such a big star, you know.
Were you still playing the flute at the time?
I owned the flute.
Aha, okay, got you.
Around that time, my father had just given me an alto saxophone. It was one of his. I didn't know how to play back then. So I would listen to the radio and listen to this one song called Mr. Magic by Grover Washington. Came on every 30 minutes. So every time it come on, I'd sit by the radio and I'd get the next line and I'd put it all together. Getting back to the Weather Report thing and the Jaco thing, we talked and I never called him. So when I got into college, I graduated from high school.
Wait. So a big star gives you the number, tells you to call him, and you didn't call him.
Oh, that happened with a bunch of people. I got a cousin named Donald Byrd I met when I was 12. He was a trumpet player, gave me his number and his address, and I never called him. He gave Herbie Hancock his start.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Donald Byrd is on some John Coltrane albums. He's a famous trumpet player. Yeah, I mean, I had all these contacts when I was young, but I never utilized them. Time came to graduate high school, and I went and auditioned at Webster University. I got in. I just kept pursuing my interest in music, and that's when I started getting really into the jazz aspects.
Did you find that having something that you were required to perform for actually helped with the practice? Because the discipline early on was obviously something that you struggled with. Did you find that you did best when you had something to perform for or look forward to?
Yeah, I used to play games with myself. So pretend like I had these auditions with people and they weren't true, but I would pretend like, oh yeah, I got to get ready to audition for McCoy Tyner. Because I had a friend playing drums with McCoy Tyner. We went to school together. He went to New York after high school and conquered. He had all the gigs. I wanted to do that too, but I didn't play so good. And then I would go to New York every summer to go see my friend because he was playing with all these famous people, and he introduced me to most of the people that I know. And he introduced me to Wynton Marsalis and Branford, Kenny Kirkland, and I would later be in the band with Sting with Kenny, you know, so I'm just getting started, getting inspired. And so I would go back to school and pretend like I had an audition with McCoy or Wynton. And I was thinking to myself, this was the catalyst. I said, all my friends are famous, and look at me. I'm in school. I can't even play that good. So what I did, I got an Omni book, and I practiced 6 hours every day for 7 days a week for 4 years.
Wow.
I practiced 2 hours in the morning. This is just on saxophone. Like I was saying earlier, I was playing piano and studying clarinet, and I was taking flute lessons. So I practiced more than 6 hours every day. but in particular on the saxophone, because I figured that's what I was going to go to New York and do, play the saxophone. So I did that for 4 years. And so when I graduated college, I joined this top 40 band. And we used to play on the riverfront in St. Louis. There was a bunch of clubs on the levee. One night I was playing and Jocko walks in. And
did he ask why you didn't call him?
No, it was a funny thing because he walked in. I don't think he recognized me because I was a little bit older. I was like about 18 at the time or 19. They went down the street because everybody said, "Oh my God, Jocko's here. Jocko's here." And I went down the street after on my break and I walked up to him and I said, "Do you remember me?" He said, "Fox Theater in the Alley, 1976. And I was like, whoa. And Jocko turned out to be, he was like a dad to me. And the first thing I told him, I said, you remind me a lot of my father. He said, well, if I remind you of your father, you need to go home and go to bed.
You won't say that again, huh?
I went home and went to bed. I said, okay, see ya.
That's funny.
Yep, I went home and I went to bed, and I played in this top 40 band for a couple of years. We used to go to Atlantic City and play the Harris Casino. I would go to New York on the days off. And then when the gig was over, I quit the band and I moved to New York. I had $500 in my pocket. So I moved up there and I stayed with my friend Ronnie, who was playing all the gigs. And so I slept on the couch and I would get up and I'd go play on the street corners in the village. I used to play in Washington Square Park, and I'd make $4 a day.
Wow.
I lived off of $4 a day. So I had $1 to get to the village, $1 to get home, and $1 to get back to the village the next day, and $1 for a slice of pizza, and that would be dinner.
So you learned some really valuable lessons. You learned budgeting.
Oh, you know what I learned the most? I learned how to live like a poor person, no matter how much money I ever had. Some things you just do not forget, some things you value very much when you have to go through these times. You know, when you have experienced not having enough food to eat, being homeless, you know, when you acquire later on, you remember these things.
Are there any things from those times that you have been able to move beyond? I mean, does it stay with you forever? I mean, there's a difference between appreciating that it exists, and then there's also the possibility to understand it, but then allow yourself to receive at a higher level. So obviously, if you've been doing work with Sting and other musicians, there has to be some level of allowing yourself to receive higher than living on $4 a day, right?
Well, let me tell you something about when I played with Sting. When I was with Sting, only thing I bought a house, because I had a family, wife and baby. Furnished the house, I bought 2 Rovers that I never drove. I just couldn't get with the English thing because I was living in England at the time. So, I bought 4 pairs of shoes, 2 leather jackets, and 4 shirts. That's all I did with my Sting money. I've always never needed much. I grew up without a lot of things as a child. Mm-hmm. I was never scared to spend money. I just never needed it.
The experience is not the things, really, are what life is about.
Whatever you have to learn how to take care of it.
Was that something that you had to learn in your own life? Because, when you were working with Sting, you go from, at one point in your life, making $4 a day to making money that a lot of people would only dream about. Did you have that moment where you had to figure that out for yourself? Or did you think it was just something because of where you came from, you had this appreciation already and were able to take care of the things? And things, of course, is not just your physical things, but your relationships, yourself, your commitments and responsibilities. What did that look like for you?
Well, I always was a responsible person. I had people that depended on me. So I was never kind of a guy to be stupid with money. I can't say that I have ever not appreciated what I have.
So gratitude's sort of a gift, honestly, in really just always looking around and seeing the good things that you have, no matter where you are.
Yeah, it's like when I go to the store, I was in the store the other day and I was like, I don't need anything. I'm looking around the store. I don't need any clothes. I don't need anything. I'm a man of little means.
I've met so many really awesome, high energy, and I say like high vibrational people in my life. And one of the things that I noticed that I was picking up from you too is really just that sense of being happy, grateful, and really just okay wherever you are and whatever you're doing. Like you always make the most of a situation. You know, you end up on a church stage and you're involved in this big production and you're just grateful. You're grateful for the people who come up to you and express their love for the music you're making, right? And you're grateful for the people whose presence you're in, probably grateful to be able to be making music and doing things professionally that you love, because how many people went to the college and ended up not pursuing or ended up losing jobs and things like that. So there's so much perspective there, but there's this certain level of energy that you put off and that I've noticed a lot of people put off, who it seems, you know, some people from the outside will look and say, oh, there's so much fortune, they're just lucky. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, it's
It
not
wasn't
lucky.
always like that.
Like how many hours a day did you have to put in to be lucky in your life, right?
Right. It's all work and no luck.
Yeah. I used to have this saying. It said, believing in luck keeps you stuck. Choose your outcome instead. Because when we put something to an outside influence, and I'm sure you probably have seen this so much in entertainment industry where people are relying on external sources for their happiness. Well, what do when the money doesn't come in or when the gigs aren't happening? I mean, they go through these dark places, but when you really manage to handle your energy and find the gratitude in every moment, I would imagine you are in so much more control of your outcome and what happens to you from that point.
Well, I'll tell you something. I've had my gift taken away from me twice. One time I got my hand burned and I couldn't play for 2 years. And I still have no feeling in the certain part of my hand. Another time I had gotten robbed and gotten shot after a gig and almost died.
Wow.
And I couldn't play for a couple of years. When you have downtime like that, after you've had opportunities of professionalism and had a chance to earn some good money, it makes you really appreciate if you ever get that chance again. If I ever get that chance again, I used to say to myself, I will do this differently. I will have a different outlook on life. I will take care of myself. I will do everything I'm supposed to do.
So when you make that bargain with God, everybody wants to know, but did you? So did you do what you said you would do?
Absolutely. And I made that bargain with God and myself because I owed it to myself and I owed it to God since he gave me the gift to do the best I can.
What was one thing that you said that you promised, if I ever get the chance, I'll do this? What was one thing that you wouldn't mind sharing with us that you bargained with?
Just to be able to play and be successful with my career. You know, I already knew how to practice. I was in bands and things like that, but I always wanted to surround myself, like Jocko used to tell me, to always surround myself with people who were better than me musically. He said, this is the way you're going to grow.
Yeah. I always tell people you are the collective of the 5 people you surround yourself with the most. And I loved in your story early on, you were talking about looking around at all these people who had all these, great experiences and were getting famous and playing. And you're looking around like, what am I doing?
Yeah. I'm glad I went to school, though, because they gave me a chance to get an education. Later on down the line, Wynton quit Juilliard when he was young, and he became very famous, Lincoln Center Jazz, all that stuff. He's doing great, his brother too. And my friend Ronnie, when he was 18, he conquered New York, but he eventually went back to school and became a professor at SUNY Purchase. Because after you get in your 50s or your latter 40s, you start to understand the need to and appreciate other things in life. Because when you're out there doing gigs, that's for kids. When I was 19, 20, 21 years old, I was running wild in the streets of New York. Didn't care, wasn't afraid, hungry, but had no fear.
Do you think part of your experiences and your moving away from the gigs and stuff had anything to do with being shot or any of the other things that you were dealing with? My husband was a sound man for a band, and gigs are tough and late hours, and they can cost you relationships and they can be tough. So did any of that play into your wanting to move and transition to the next phase of that?
Well, it kind of happened on its own.
You had some pretty amazing experiences pretty early in your life.
Yeah.
I want to fast forward just a little bit. How old were you when you started playing with Sting? And you had said there were some other great musicians as well that you've played with and stuff like that. But I'm looking at the Sting because I think that a lot of the listeners know that particular genre of music. And I know everyone that you've mentioned pretty much. I'm not familiar with Jocko, but how old were you when you got with Sting?
I think it was about 34, somewhere around there, because before that, I used to play with Lenny Kravitz. I used to live with Lenny Kravitz.
I love Lenny Kravitz.
Yeah, I love Lenny too. He's a nice guy.
I mean, I love his music. I definitely, yeah, his music, it comes at one of those times in your life. It's really such a transformational time.
Yeah.
And the right music, the right time, is such a great thing. So Lenny Kravitz, that's awesome. So
yeah, I'm on three or four of Lenny's records. I was with Lenny from the beginning, before he even got famous.
Wow.
I lived with him and his wife.
So you were with Jocko for a while. Did you go to Lenny from there?
No, I went to a guy named Thomas Dolby. Thomas Dolby had this hit song, "Blinded Me with Science."
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I know that song.
So I didn't want to go on tour. My friend was playing bass with him. And so he says, "Man, go on tour. Thomas wants a saxophone player." I didn't want to do it because I was being a purist back then. Jocko just died. I didn't want to do this gig. And so I said, "Okay, I'm going to do it." He said, "Great, man. We're going to fly you to LA. We're going to rehearse. We got, this and that." And so I started doing television shows. The first TV show I did was, it used to be the Joan Rivers show. And then it turned out to be Late Night, which later evolved into the Arsenio Hall show. And I thought I had made it. I thought I was a rock star. I'm on TV now. That lasted for maybe about a year. And we did Soul Train and other shows and played at the Rose Bowl. We used to open up for like Depeche Mode. After Thomas Dolby, I was homeless.
Butch's story is so inspiring and so interesting that I wanted to bring the entire story to you without many cuts. So we've decided to turn this session into a 2-part episode. So join us next week for part 2 to learn all about how he went from homeless to touring with Sting.